The steam curled gently from the mug in her hand, but the tea had long gone cold. Scarlett stood barefoot on the marble balcony, wrapped in her robe like armor. Below her, the city shimmered, glass towers, gold-lit streets, and a quiet hum that never quite slept. Behind her, the mansion exhaled silence. Not peace, not rest, just absence. She tilted her head toward the sky as if it held answers, but there were none tonight. Only the ache of being unseen. If you've ever felt invisible in your own home, if you've ever whispered in a room and still felt like you were screaming inside, this story is for you. Don't forget to subscribe, because you deserve to be seen too. The clock ticked past midnight. She hadn't meant to stay up this late, but sleep didn't come easily anymore. Her daughter Alina was tucked in hours ago. Her husband, Kieran, hadn't come home. Not that it surprised her. The first time he missed dinner, she forgave it. The 10th time, she excused it. Now, it was the rule, not the exception. She walked back into the living room, mug still in hand. The walls were high and smooth. The art on display was hers. Pieces she once painted with fire in her chest and hope in her fingers. Now, they stared back at her like strangers. She paused in front of one. A portrait of a girl standing in a field, laughing with her arms open wide. That used to be her. That girl who believed in forever, who believed in promises, who believed that love could survive ambition. The silence in the room pressed against her skin. She wasn't unhappy because of something loud. There were no fights, no slamming doors, no screaming matches. No. Her sadness came from nothing. From empty seats at the dinner table. From unread messages. From birthdays marked on calendars, but not in hearts. From hearing I'm working more than I love you. It was a slow fading, like a color left in the sun too long. There was no villain in this story, at least not the kind people expect. There was just forgetting. Forgetting to show up. Forgetting to look up. Forgetting to hold on when it mattered most. Once, a long time ago, but not long enough to forget, Scarlett had danced barefoot. Through that same living room, her laughter echoing against those tall windows. Back then, the walls weren't just filled with art. They were alive with music, conversation, and warmth. She met Kieran when they were both still searching for who they might become. He walked into the gallery on a rainy Thursday, soaked through his suit, but stopped cold in front of one of her pieces. He didn't speak for nearly 5 minutes. When he finally did, he asked, "Did you paint this from a dream or from memory?" She looked up, startled. "From both," she replied. That was how it began, without pretense, a connection born in stillness. He was sharp and focused, already sprinting toward his future. She moved more gently, but her passion for creating burned just as fiercely. They were different, but not opposing. Two halves of something whole. He brought her coffee while she painted. She brought calm to his chaos. They stayed up talking until sunrise. He memorized the way she tucked her hair behind her ear. She loved the way he listened. When Kieran asked her to marry him, he didn't do it on a stage or at a rooftop restaurant. He did it in her studio while she was painting, with pigment on her cheek and love in her eyes. He told her, "You make the world feel less cold." That night, she said yes with her whole soul. They built a life quickly, bought a house with big windows and bigger dreams, welcomed a daughter whose first cry made Kieran weep in awe. They named her Alina, bright in the old tongue, and for a time, everything was light. But success is a demanding lover. And slowly, Kieran began answering to it more than to her. Meetings crept into weekends. Birthdays became business calls. Her voice, once a melody he paused to hear, became background noise. Scarlett tried to hold on. She stayed soft. She stayed steady. But no matter how often she reached across the bed, her hand returned empty. And so, piece by piece, she stopped reaching. It's strange how someone can still share your roof, your table, your child, yet feel farther than a stranger. There wasn't a single moment it all fell apart. No fight that broke the bridge. It was the slow undoing of closeness, the quiet neglect of care. He never said, "I don't love you anymore." He simply stopped showing it. And what is love without presence, without attention, without touch. The mornings came like clockwork, but nothing about them felt alive. Scarlett woke before the sun, not because she needed to, but because it was the only time the house felt still in a way she could breathe. The marble floors beneath her feet were cold, always cold, no matter the season. She padded quietly to the kitchen and filled the kettle, her movements practiced, efficient, hollow. She didn't need an alarm anymore. Her body had memorized the silence. In the soft glow of the under-cabinet lights, she poured herself tea. The mug, her favorite one with the chipped rim, was the only thing in that kitchen that felt personal. Everything else gleamed, untouched. Appliances polished to perfection, cabinets organized to the inch. An aesthetic of success, not comfort. She sat at the long dining table, 12 chairs surrounding her, only one ever used. Across the table sat a second placemat, out of habit, not hope. She stopped placing food there months ago. Now, it was a placeholder for a presence that never arrived. Somewhere down the hallway, a small door creaked open. Alina appeared, sleep still clinging to her, one sock half off, her stuffed rabbit under her arm. Scarlett's face softened. "Morning, baby," she whispered, rising to meet her. Alina rubbed her eyes. "Is Daddy home?" Scarlett knelt down and kissed her forehead. He had to leave early. It was the same answer every time. Alina no longer questioned it. They sat together in the kitchen while Scarlett poured cereal and added blueberries, the way Alina liked them, each one carefully picked, never too ripe. These small details were her devotion, her way of making the world feel safe for the only person who looked at her like she still mattered. After breakfast, they brushed teeth, braided hair, and packed the school bag. Kieran used to do these things. He used to draw little notes for Alina's lunchbox. Now, Scarlett wrote them alone. Short affirmations in purple ink. You are loved. You are strong. You are seen. Once the driver took Alina to school, the house fell silent again. The echo returned. Scarlett wandered through the rooms like a visitor in a gallery. Each space was immaculate, curated, and cold. Her paintings hung on the walls, framed pieces of her soul, once bursting with feeling. Now, they watched her like quiet witnesses. She paused in the hallway near her studio. The door was open, but she hesitated. Inside, sunlight poured in from the tall windows, spilling across the wooden floor. Where unfinished canvases leaned against the walls like forgotten thoughts, she stepped inside and stood in front of one blank canvas. She hadn't painted in days, maybe weeks. Time had started blending together in soft grays. When she did paint now, it was slow, hesitant, as if each brushstroke had to pass through the filter of what used to be. She ran her fingers over the edge of a canvas, feeling the grain of the surface. Her hand hovered above the brush, but didn't lift it. Instead, she sat by the window. It wasn't that she didn't have ideas. The ideas were there. What she lacked was the energy to believe they mattered. The last time Kieran walked into her studio, he was on a call. He paced behind her, speaking in clipped phrases, and didn't even glance at her work. When he left, he kissed the top of her head absently, like one would touch a doorknob without thinking. That was the moment she realized he hadn't looked at her in weeks. Not really, not with the eyes that once held awe. Now, she was furniture, a fixture in a house designed for appearances. Dinner was quiet, as always. Scarlett prepared baked salmon with rosemary, roasted carrots, and brown rice, dishes Kieran used to love. She lit candles on the table, not for romance, but because warm light made the emptiness feel a little less sharp. 2 plates sat waiting. She ate alone. She left his plate untouched, as she had for weeks, and wrapped it up without a word. The refrigerator shelves had become a rotating archive of uneaten meals, carefully prepared, carefully stored, quietly discarded. Kieran usually texted by 9 p.m., short messages like late meeting, don't wait up, or working overnight, see you in the morning. Nothing soft, nothing with warmth, just statements, as if she were a housekeeper waiting for a schedule update. Scarlett no longer replied. Sometimes, she wondered if silence was a form of language between them now, a language neither of them had the courage to translate. She cleared the plates and rinsed them with precision. Every movement was mechanical, deliberate, like cleaning up after a gathering that never happened. After Alina fell asleep, Scarlett walked down the hallway, pausing outside the guest room. Kieran had started sleeping there 2 months ago. He said it was for focus, late-night calls, uninterrupted rest. But it wasn't just the distance of doors. It was the distance in his eyes, in his tone, in the absence of anything that used to connect them. She opened the door to their original bedroom. Everything was still in place. Their framed wedding photo sat on the nightstand. Dust had begun to gather along the edges. She sat on the bed, running her fingers across the pillow beside hers. How did it happen? How does love, once so alive, grow this quiet? There was no other woman, no scandal, just time, busyness, and a man who'd forgotten how to look back at what he once held dear. She reached for her journal, the only place she allowed herself to say the things she no longer said aloud. I miss being touched without needing to ask for it. I miss hearing my name spoken with feeling. I miss being someone's favorite person. The pen hovered above the page. I miss being seen. She closed the journal. She walked to her studio again, pulled the canvas forward, and sat down. This time, she dipped the brush into deep blue and pressed it to the canvas. A single stroke, then another. Her hand moved slowly at first, then with more certainty. She didn't know what the painting would become, but for the first time in days, she wasn't thinking about who wouldn't see it. She was painting for herself. The brush moved with quiet rhythm, steady as her breath. Her mind emptied as the colors spread. She didn't notice the tears at first. They didn't fall like a storm. They came like her sadness always did, softly, steadily, like a river underneath everything. That night, she didn't wait for Kieran to come home. She didn't check her phone. She didn't cry beside his empty space in bed. She just lay down, one arm curled beneath her head, and stared at the ceiling in silence, because silence had become her mirror, and in that mirror, she no longer saw the woman she used to be. Have you ever felt like you were fading in a relationship? Have you ever stopped talking because you were tired of never being heard? Leave a comment below. Someone else might need to hear your story too. It started with a match. Scarlett struck it in the dim stillness of her studio, its brief flame catching the edge of a wick. The candle flickered to life, casting soft shadows across the floor, the walls, her hands. She didn't plan it. There was no setup, no announcement. She just needed to feel something warm. Alina sat nearby on the rug, humming to herself as she arranged colored beads in patterns only a 5-year-old could understand. Her small fingers moved with a kind of wonder Scarlett had forgotten she once had. The camera was already on her desk, something Kieran had bought years ago during one of his productivity kicks. She picked it up without thinking, turned it on, and let it record. She didn't speak to it at first, didn't look directly into the lens. She simply let it witness her. She set the camera near the windowsill, pointed loosely at her workspace, and began to paint. The sound of her brush meeting canvas filled the room with rhythm, soft, repetitive, grounding. 15 minutes passed. She hadn't meant to film that long, but when she watched it back that night, something about the silence in it felt honest, not staged, not curated. She uploaded it to a video platform with no caption, no tags, just titled it, Tuesday, 4:07 p.m. That was it. No one noticed. Not at first, but she did it again the next day. This time, she whispered a few thoughts while she painted, small reflections, spoken as if reading from a journal no one would ever open. I used to believe quiet was peaceful, but lately quiet feels more like forgetting. The views were minimal, but someone commented, "This feels like I'm sitting with someone I miss." Another wrote, "I didn't know I needed this until now." Scarlett stared at the screen. Her fingers hovered above the keyboard. She didn't reply, but she read the comments again. Twice, then 3 times. The next week, she lit the candle again, sat in front of the canvas again. This time, she let her voice pour more freely, soft, unhurried, almost like she was writing letters to a younger version of herself. They tell you marriage is work, but they don't tell you it can feel like working beside a stranger who once made your heart skip just by saying your name. Her voice trembled when she said it. But she didn't stop recording. She uploaded that video without editing it. By morning, it had tripled the views of the last one. Days passed, then weeks. Each new video followed the same rhythm. A candle lit, a canvas awakened, a soft voice speaking into the quiet. Scarlett didn't chase performance. She didn't stage moments or rehearse lines. Her studio remained untouched by filters or backdrops. If a brush fell, she let it. If Alina sang in the background, she left it in. That authenticity became her heartbeat. Her voice had a certain texture, gentle, untrained, sometimes breaking mid-thought, but it carried truth. People didn't just watch, they stayed. They leaned in. They paused and listened like her words were pages from their own lives. The comment section turned into something sacred. Not noise, not numbers, but real stories from strangers. My wife left last year. Your voice reminds me of the nights I stopped asking if she was okay. This made me text my husband just now. We haven't talked about us in a long time. I cried, and I don't even know why. Maybe I've been lonely too. Each message reached her in ways Kieran hadn't in years. But it wasn't fame she felt. It was connection. People weren't following her to watch her paint. They were sitting beside her, in the stillness, finding a mirror in her voice. She began calling the videos letters in paint. Not everyone had narration. Sometimes it was just the brush, the hum of life in the background, and her presence. That alone was enough for many. One night, she stared into the lens for a moment before speaking. No canvas, no candle, just her. No makeup, no script. Just her heart, resting in her throat. There are days I don't feel beautiful, not in the way the world defines it, but in the way I used to feel when someone looked at me like I mattered. I think the hardest part of losing someone slowly is that you never get to say goodbye. You just start realizing the space between you is too wide to cross without breaking. But I'm still here. I'm still reaching. And maybe that's enough today. She closed the video with a nod. No smile, no farewell, just the stillness of truth. It reached over 40,000 views in 3 days. More comments, more shares. A few creators stitched her words with their own reflections. People began tagging one another. Watch this. You need to hear this. Still, Scarlett didn't speak about Kieran. Not once. She never said his name, never blamed, never accused. That was never the point. She wasn't asking for pity. She wasn't trying to shame anyone. She was simply offering honesty. And somehow, that honesty felt rare. The video that changed everything started like all the others, quiet, unannounced. It was late. Alina had fallen asleep on the couch, one sock missing, her hair fanned out like wild threads of light. The house was dark, except for the soft lamp in the studio and the candle flickering on Scarlett's desk. She set up the camera, sat on the floor with a blanket over her legs, and rested her elbows on her knees. She didn't look straight into the lens right away. She stared at the flame for a long time, as if it might steady her. When she did speak, her voice was barely above a whisper. I used to believe love was about the big moments, the wedding, the house, the child, the promises we made in front of others. But I was wrong. Love lives in the little things, the forehead kiss before work, the way his hand found mine while crossing the street, laughing at burnt toast, remembering how I take my tea, knowing the song that calms me when I'm anxious. That's where love lives, quietly, without an audience. And when those little things stop, you don't notice at first. You convince yourself it's just a phase, that maybe he's tired, or distracted, or busy providing. But one day, you wake up next to someone who no longer sees you. And that kind of silence is louder than any argument. She paused. Her eyes glistened, but she didn't wipe them. So I paint. Not because I'm whole, but because something inside me still remembers how it felt to be chosen. She looked down, exhaled slowly. If someone still holds your hand without thinking, hold it back. If you still laugh together over nothing, hold on to that. Because when those small things disappear, they leave behind an emptiness that no gift, no apology, no grand gesture can fill. She reached forward and turned off the camera without saying goodbye. She didn't post it immediately. She watched it again at dawn, sitting with a cup of tea gone cold in her hand. And then she uploaded it. Title, The Little Things. By sunset, it had 600,000 views. By midnight, over 1 million. The comment section was overflowing. This shattered me. Why am I crying on my lunch break? I called my wife after this, just to ask if she's okay. This made me remember the day my husband stopped asking how my day was. Scarlett watched the numbers rise, watched her words ripple across strangers' lives, and for the first time in years she felt something shift inside her. Not pride, not power, just relief. She wasn't invisible. Someone heard her. Many did, and they stayed. If her words moved you, don't just scroll. Let someone else see this. Share it. Someone out there might need this voice, just like you did. The views didn't just grow, they surged. Within 48 hours, The Little Things passed 2 million views. By the end of the week, it was everywhere, shared across timelines, group chats, reaction videos. Her voice, gentle, wounded, sincere, poured through screens into kitchens, offices, living rooms, and hearts. It wasn't dramatic. It was truthful. That's what made it powerful. On a college campus in Oregon, a psychology professor paused her lecture to play. The video then opened a discussion. What happens when intimacy becomes invisible? In a quiet apartment in Atlanta, a retired nurse forwarded it to her daughters, with the message, please don't wait too long to speak up in your marriages. In Dubai, a father of 3 closed his laptop after watching it during his lunch break, leaned over to his wife and whispered, I've been missing you, haven't I? In a New York recording studio, a music producer left a comment, this hit harder than most songs I've made. Real, raw, thank you. Men watched it, women watched it, couples watched it in silence, and then, for the first time in a while, talked. The message wasn't flashy, but it struck somewhere tender, and so the world watched her, not for scandal, not for spectacle, but for the way her quiet grief reflected theirs. Her follower count skyrocketed. Her videos, once barely noticed, now had thousands of comments, stitched clips, quote posts. But in her mansion north of Chicago, Scarlett remained. Still, she didn't change her setup, didn't upgrade her lighting. She didn't hire a manager or do press. She posted as she always had, with honesty, with warmth, without pretending to be anything more than a woman reclaiming her voice. And that voice kept echoing. Meanwhile, across town, in the top floor of a steel-glass tower, Kieran Delgado sat in a boardroom, flipping through quarterly reports. He hadn't seen the video, not yet. He didn't notice the way his assistant glanced at him differently that morning, or the way one of his investors said, I didn't know your wife painted that well. Kieran gave a polite nod, not registering the context. It wasn't until lunchtime that he noticed his phone buzzing with unusual frequency. At first, he ignored it, but when the 5th message came from someone unexpected, his mother, it caught his attention. Have you seen Scarlett's video? You should. He blinked at the message. What video? Another text came in. His assistant, shorter, more cautious. You might want to check this. It's everywhere. He clicked the link. He didn't speak for the entire 7 minutes of the video. He sat back in his chair, watching Scarlett in that soft light, sitting with her knees drawn up, her voice low and steady. Not angry, not bitter, just real. His chest tightened with every line. With every memory, her words stirred. She hadn't said his name, but he didn't need her to. Kieran watched the video a second time, then a third. He didn't blink much, didn't move, just sat there, jaw locked, shoulders rigid. It was her voice that undid him. Not the words, but the way she said them. No accusation, no raised tone, just weariness, and something softer beneath it. Grief that had been folded and folded until it looked like calm. She hadn't attacked him, but the silence between her words was loud enough to feel like a mirror. He stared at the screen long after the video ended, the static pause mocking him. His own reflection in the black glass felt foreign. In the hallway outside the boardroom, 2 junior partners whispered. He caught his name. They didn't notice he was behind the door. He walked past them and didn't say a word. By the time he reached his office, there were 5 new emails. One from PR, politely flagging the situation as public-facing. One from his legal advisor, gently recommending silence. 3 from people he hadn't spoken to in years. But it was a text from an old friend that hit him the hardest. Kieran, how did you not see her slipping away like that? He didn't reply. He just sat behind his desk, pulled open the drawer where he kept his wedding band, he hadn't worn it in months, and stared at it. He couldn't remember the last time he watched her paint, the last time he asked about her day, the last time he complimented her. He couldn't even recall the last full conversation they had that didn't involve logistics. It wasn't just that she had spoken, it was that the world had listened, and now they were looking at him, some with sympathy, some with judgment. But he wasn't thinking about public opinion. He was thinking about her eyes in that video, how tired they looked, how familiar, and yet so far. That evening, for the first time in weeks, Kieran came home early. The driveway lights flickered on as he pulled in. The house looked the same, perfect, unchanged. It always did. And that was the problem. Inside, the warmth of cooking lingered in the air. Faint piano music played from the living room speaker. He heard Alina's soft giggle from the hallway, then her feet padding upstairs. And then, silence. He followed the faint smell of paint and candle wax to her studio. The door was open. She sat by the window, her back to him, a brush moving slowly across a canvas. The flame on the desk danced. Alina lay curled up on a pillow nearby, clutching her stuffed rabbit in sleep. Kieran stood at the threshold for several seconds before speaking. I saw the video, he said. Scarlett didn't flinch, didn't turn. He stepped further in. You went viral. Still, she kept painting. Her voice was calm. Funny, she said, finally looking up, brush still in hand. I thought I had disappeared. Kieran didn't know what he expected. Tears, yelling, maybe even relief. But Scarlett gave him none of that. She placed the brush in the water jar, wiped her hands on a paint-streaked towel, and looked at him. Not through him, not away from him, at him, for the first time in a long time. He stepped closer, slowly, eyes drifting from her face to the canvas. He expected a portrait, or a landscape. Instead, it was abstract, streaks of color that pulsed with something unnamed. What is it? He asked. Her eyes didn't leave his. Loneliness, she said simply. He nodded once, swallowing. I didn't know you felt like that. You didn't ask, she said, not harshly, just honestly. He looked down at Alina, curled in sleep, her small chest rising and falling peacefully. I never meant to hurt you, he offered. I know, Scarlett replied, but neglect doesn't always announce itself. It builds in silence. The words landed heavy. He reached for the back of the chair, gripping it like he might lose balance. I saw the comments. People think I'm a monster. This isn't about what people think, she said. This is about what you stopped seeing. A beat passed, then another. You could have said something, he muttered, quieter now. I did, she said, eyes steady. But you were always looking past me. I didn't go online to get attention. I went online because I couldn't keep speaking to empty rooms. He ran a hand through his hair, jaw tight. I didn't realize it had gotten that bad. That's the problem, Kieran, she said gently. You didn't notice I was fading, because to you, I was still here, doing the work, raising our child, managing the home, but I was shrinking, quietly, every day. He sat down, slowly, across from her. You were right, he admitted. The little things. I stopped doing them. I stopped seeing you. She didn't respond right away. She glanced at the canvas again, then back at him. You were building an empire, she said, and somewhere in that climb, I stopped being part of your view. The room fell quiet. Not the hollow silence that used to fill the mansion. This was something else, something truthful. He looked at her, really looked, and saw someone who hadn't been waiting for. Him, someone who had learned how to sit in her solitude without falling apart. I'm not here to ask you to forgive me tonight, he said. I didn't want you to think I hadn't seen it now." "I do." Scarlett nodded slowly. "That's a start," she whispered. He stood, not knowing what else to say. He looked toward the hallway, where their daughter's drawings were taped. On the wall, tiny crooked hearts and stick figures holding hands. "Good night," he said. "Good night," she replied, turning back to her canvas. He paused at the door. "Scarlett?" He said softly, "Yes?" "I missed the sound of your voice when it was speaking to me." She didn't turn around. Then, quietly, "So did I." The next morning, there were flowers on the kitchen island. A bouquet too large for the vase he put it in, petals sprawling awkwardly over breakfast plates. Red, pink, even orange, vibrant, loud, the kind of arrangement one might send after a missed anniversary or public mistake. Scarlett stared at it as she poured Alina's cereal. She didn't say a word. That afternoon, a box arrived at the door. Jewelry, something sleek and expensive. A note inside, handwritten in Kieran's rushed script, "I'm trying." That evening, another delivery, a new set of paintbrushes, top of the line, still in plastic, still with tags. He was trying. But he didn't know how. Scarlett placed the flowers in a proper vase and moved them to the guest bathroom. She put the jewelry in a drawer, unopened. She left the paintbrushes on the studio table, untouched. She didn't ignore him, but she didn't praise him either. They spoke lightly in passing, small exchanges about dinner, Alina's homework, the dry cleaning, but nothing real, nothing that felt rooted. On the fourth day, Kieran came home early again. He found her folding laundry in the living room, soft music playing in the background. He stood by the doorway with a small gift bag in his hand. "I know you don't want things," he said, "but I thought maybe this would help." She looked up, her eyes clear. He stepped forward, placed the bag on the couch. Inside was a framed photo, one of their early days. Her head on his shoulder, eyes closed, his hand holding hers in quiet tenderness. It was one of her favorites, but he hadn't noticed it was already hanging in the hallway. She met his gaze. "Gifts are easy, Kieran," she said, her voice kind, not cutting. "Presence is hard." He exhaled, a slow breath, as if the truth of her words landed somewhere deep. "You're right," he murmured. She went back to folding the laundry. He sat down beside her, not close, but close enough for the silence to feel less distant. "I don't expect you to trust that I've changed," he said. "I just want you to know I'm learning how to see you again." She nodded once, but didn't look at him. That was the first honest thing he'd said in days. It started with breakfast. Not an elaborate gesture. No tray with folded napkins or hand-squeezed juice. Just 2 slices of toast and a scrambled egg he made for Alina while Scarlett packed her lunchbox. Kieran placed the plate in front of his daughter, then looked at Scarlett, unsure. She raised an eyebrow slightly. "She likes her eggs with pepper." The next morning, he added pepper. No speeches, no show. Just learning. He started walking Alina to the car in the mornings, waiting at the curb until she waved from the window. At first, it felt like something he was doing to prove something, but over time, it became a habit that made him smile. He started coming home earlier, sometimes just sitting in the living room while Scarlett cooked. He didn't hover, he didn't force conversation, but he was there. One evening, as she stirred soup at the stove, he stood beside her, reaching for the salt. Their hands brushed, neither pulled away. Their eyes met, brief, unsure, and then he handed her the shaker. Moments like that continued. One night, she walked into the kitchen to find him rinsing dishes, sleeves rolled up, water dripping from his wrists. "You don't have to do that," she said. He glanced over. "I know. I want to." She hesitated, then handed him another plate. They washed in silence, shoulders brushing occasionally. There was no music playing, no conversation, but something in that quiet moment felt less lonely. In the studio, he sometimes watched her paint from the doorway. Not every night. Not long. Just enough. One evening, she noticed him sitting cross-legged near the shelves, flipping through one of her old sketchbooks. He looked up, held it gently. "These were from when we first moved in," he said. She nodded. "Back when the walls weren't so quiet." He didn't respond. He just kept turning pages slowly, like each sketch held a piece of what they lost. The first time she laughed again, it caught them both off guard. Alina had been painting on the floor, trying to draw the family dog from memory, except they'd never had a dog. The result was a lopsided, wide-eyed creature with a body shaped like a bread roll. Kieran chuckled. "Is that a raccoon?" "No, Daddy. It's Sparkle." "Sparkle?" he asked. Scarlett raised an eyebrow. "Since when do we have a dog named Sparkle?" "Since right now," Alina announced, dipping her brush in green. Scarlett laughed, not a polite chuckle, but the kind of laugh that warmed the room. Kieran looked at her like he hadn't seen her smile in years. Because he hadn't. Saturday morning brought slow light and the smell of cinnamon. Scarlett sat on the balcony with a warm cup in hand, finally letting herself rest. No camera, no narration, just breath. From the studio below, faint voices carried upward. She stood quietly and walked down the hall, drawn by the sound. Inside the studio, Kieran sat cross-legged on the floor, his shirt already smudged with streaks of red and blue. Alina sat beside him, holding his wrist and guiding his hand across the canvas. No, watch," she giggled. "You mix this color with this one. It makes purple. Are you sure?" Kieran asked, exaggerated doubt in his voice. "Yes, I'm an expert," she declared. He dipped the brush again, carefully following her instruction, his face scrunched in deep concentration. Scarlett stood in the doorway, unnoticed. The canvas was chaos, swirls and blobs. One part had what looked like a sun with glasses. Another was just layers of fingerprints and brush taps. But the center of it all, more powerful than any technique, was the sight of her daughter leaning against her father's arm, and her father letting her lead. No phone, no briefcase nearby, just two hands in paint, and one moment fully lived. Kieran looked up and saw Scarlett standing there. He didn't jump, didn't explain. He just smiled, a little sheepish, a little proud. "She's a tough teacher," he said, nodding toward the paint-streaked critic beside him. Scarlett stepped inside, arms crossed gently over her chest. "She's got a good eye," she replied. Their gazes met. Nothing dramatic, just that long, quiet recognition of something trying again. Trying slowly, trying honestly. Later that night, after Alina had fallen asleep with dried paint on her cheeks, Scarlett found Kieran cleaning the brushes at the sink. "You didn't have to do that," she said. "I know," he said, rinsing carefully, "but I wanted the brushes to last." She stood beside him, leaning against the counter. "You're different lately," she said. "I'm learning how to stay," he answered. They didn't need more words. Not yet. But something in that moment felt real, like a new stroke on an old canvas, imperfect and hopeful. What does presence mean to you in a relationship? Is it the text that says home soon? The way they listen without checking their phone? The sound of footsteps down the hallway when you thought you were alone? Tell us below. Let's redefine love together. Scarlett didn't announce anything. She didn't change her channel name, didn't post a bold title like he came back or we're trying again. She simply kept showing up, in her studio, beside her daughter, behind her brush. But something in her videos shifted. The sadness was still there, but it no longer sat alone. It had been joined by something steadier, not quite hope, not quite peace, but something beginning. In one video, she was mixing colors, while Alina sat nearby playing with dried leaves. "Some days," she said softly, "he brings tea. No words, just tea. Some days we sit in the same room and say nothing, and it still means more than all the noise we used to have. I'm not telling you to go back. I'm not telling you to stay. I'm just saying, sometimes people remember how to show up, and sometimes that's worth exploring." The comments were immediate. "Are you saying you've forgiven him?" "Girl, don't do it. This feels real. Quietly real. I don't know whether to cheer or cry, but I'm watching every step." Scarlett didn't respond to every opinion. She didn't owe explanations. She wasn't teaching people how to fix a relationship. She was showing what it looked like to take small, careful steps toward something that might be whole again, if both people were willing to work, wait, and witness. That Sunday, she burned the pancakes. Not slightly toasted, charcoal, She forgot to lower the heat, distracted by Alina dancing to music in the kitchen. Kieran rushed in from the hallway, waving a dish towel as the smoke alarm beeped overhead. Scarlett burst out laughing, the kind that made her shoulders shake. "Perfect," she wheezed, flipping a lump of what looked like tire rubber onto a plate. "Blackened," Kieran said with a straight face. "Chef's choice." Alina clapped. "I love crunchy pancakes." They all laughed, loud, messy, genuine. It was the first time in years the kitchen felt like home. In therapy, they were still awkward. Scarlett sat with her arms crossed for the first 2 sessions. Kieran kept adjusting his posture like a student trying to pass a test. But when the therapist asked, "Why did you agree to come?" Kieran didn't talk about the video, or the public response, or the embarrassment of being exposed. He simply said, "I missed her, and I realized I was losing my family, one distracted week at a time." Scarlett didn't cry, but she looked down at her hands for a long time. "I don't want to be begged," she said. "I want to be noticed. I want to be included. I want to feel like I belong in the life we built together." The therapist nodded. "That's where we start." Mornings began to settle into something gentler. Kieran made the coffee now. It wasn't perfect, too strong some days, but Scarlett drank it anyway, if only because she didn't have to ask for it. Alina began drawing 3 figures again when she scribbled on napkins, herself. Her mom and now her dad. Hand in hand, no one standing off to the side. They started walking together in the evenings, around the block, sometimes in silence. Other times, Scarlett talked about her next painting series, and Kieran listened without looking at his phone. He didn't try to fix her sadness. He just let her speak. That alone was new. One night, after Alina had gone to sleep, they stood in the kitchen rinsing dishes. The window above the sink was fogged, the floor beneath them cool. She passed him the last plate, and their fingers touched. This time, neither moved away. He looked at her. She looked back, and for a moment, everything held still. Not the kind of stillness that used to echo between them, but a quiet filled with something almost warm. "Can I?" he began, voice barely above a breath. She nodded once. He stepped closer, slowly. She leaned in, just slightly. Their lips met, not urgent, not aching, just close, just there. It wasn't a grand return. It was a homecoming. The kiss lasted only a few seconds, but it carried the weight of years. When they pulled away, neither spoke. They didn't need to. The next morning, she posted a video, just her, sitting at the edge of her studio, knees drawn up, a blanket around her shoulders. "Healing is strange," she began. "It doesn't ask permission. It arrives quietly. Often when you've stopped waiting for it. I don't believe love is always worth saving, but I do believe love that shows up, that listens, that tries, deserves a chance to grow again, not because of the past, but because of what the present is willing to become." There was no hint, no name, but viewers noticed the softness in her voice, the way her eyes lingered longer on the camera, the way her silence no longer seemed like sorrow. The reactions came fast, split down the middle. "If you forgive him, you're setting women back. This is so brave. Not everyone wants to try again. I'm cheering for you, but I'm scared for you too. He better deserve this second chance." Scarlett didn't respond. She didn't need to justify where she was, because she wasn't teaching people to follow her path. She was reminding them they were allowed to choose their own. Scarlett noticed the way people spoke about her now. Some treated her like a symbol, a kind of muse for heartbreak or healing or female resilience. Others used her as a measuring stick, a way to compare, criticize, or validate their own decisions. But she wasn't anyone's template. She was a woman making quiet choices in a life that had once drowned her in silence. She still filmed, though not as often. She still lit the same candle, still painted with the same slow rhythm. Only now, the colors had shifted. A little more warmth in the palette, a little more space in the canvas. One evening, she posted a new video. No paint, no music, just her. She sat cross-legged on the floor in her studio, hands in her lap. "There's no neat ending to this," she said. "No final scene where everything gets wrapped in a bow. Some people leave, and it's the best thing that could happen. Some people come back, and it's right to let them try again. I've learned not to judge myself by the volume of other people's opinions. I've learned that rebuilding doesn't mean forgetting, and I've learned that love, the kind worth choosing, grows in how we show up daily, quietly, consistently, without being asked. She looked off screen for a moment, then back. This isn't a fairy tale, this is just life, and right now, it feels worth living again. The video ended without music, without fanfare, just stillness. Truth. Downstairs, Kieran was helping Alina pack her school bag. He didn't know she was filming. He hadn't asked to be included. And that, Scarlett realized, was part of why it mattered, because for the first time in a long time, he wasn't performing. He was just here. Later that night, as they sat on the couch folding laundry, she leaned into his shoulder. Not a statement, just a movement. Simple. Familiar. He said nothing. He didn't have to, and for once, that silence didn't feel empty. The camera was steady, framed wide. Scarlett sat cross-legged in the center of her studio floor, a single lamp casting soft light over the room. The shelves behind her were cluttered with old brushes, open sketchbooks, dried leaves Alina had collected and insisted were art. She wore no makeup, no jewelry. Her sweater was oversized, her hair loose. She looked into the lens like she wasn't recording a video, but simply speaking to someone she loved. Then she began, "I wasn't planning to say goodbye. Not because I'm finished, but because goodbye has always sounded so final. And this doesn't feel like an ending. It feels like a beginning, one I had to fight my way into." She paused. "When I started recording, I was lost. Not loud lost, not the kind where people notice. I was the kind of lost that still makes dinner, still folds laundry, still smiles, at school drop-off, but lies awake wondering if silence means something's broken, or if it's just what marriage becomes." Her voice didn't break, but it softened. "I never wanted followers. I wanted to feel seen. I didn't want to go viral. I just wanted someone to ask if I was okay. I never said his name. I didn't have to, because this wasn't a story about a villain. It was a story about being forgotten, in a house that looked like it had everything." She looked down briefly, then back into the lens. "Somewhere along the way, I remembered I had a voice. I remembered that showing up for yourself is not selfish. It's necessary. And when I did, you showed up too." Below the video, comments flooded in within minutes. "You said everything I've never been able to." I was packing my bags. I watched this and unpacked them, not because we're healed, but because maybe we can try. "I stopped speaking years ago. You gave me permission to start again." One woman messaged, "I'm 62. I've been married for 38 years. My husband just watched your video with me." He cried. Then he said, "Why didn't you tell me you felt this way?" And I said, "I did. You just didn't hear it until someone else said it first. Thank you for helping us both start over." Another wrote, "Gay, I lost my wife last year. I didn't notice how far apart we drifted until it was too late. Your words won't bring her back, but they're helping me be a better father. And I hope, someday, a better partner to someone who deserves my full attention." Scarlett continued, "People ask me, why did you stay? Others ask, why did you let him come back? But here's the truth. No one else gets to live your story. No one else gets to decide what healing looks like for you." She exhaled. For some, healing means leaving. For others, it means staying. Not because you're weak, but because you've watched someone earn the right to stay again. I stayed because I saw him choosing us. Not with diamonds, not with dinners, but with patience, with washed dishes, with bedtime stories read twice instead of once, with silence that finally felt safe. Scarlett continued speaking, not in a rush, but as if each word needed room to breathe. There's no checklist for mending what was torn slowly, no timeline for trusting someone who forgot how to care for your soul. But I believe people can change. I believe presence can heal where performance never could. And I believe the little things we stop doing are often what matter the most. She looked off camera for a brief moment, eyes focused on something we couldn't see. then back. He didn't come back with speeches. He came back with silence that sat beside mine. With one mug of tea. With one shared laugh over burnt food. With one night where he watched our daughter sleep like it was sacred. And little by little, I allowed myself to believe again, not in him, in us, but in the version of me that refuses to stay invisible. Her voice didn't rise. Her hands didn't move. Still, the message rang louder than any performance could have. If you're watching this and you've stopped reaching, if your voice has grown smaller in your own home, I'm not here to tell you what to do. I'm here to tell you that you matter. Your needs, your voice, your softness, your fire. You're not asking for too much. You're asking for eye contact, for warmth, for effort, for the kind of love that doesn't vanish behind a schedule. She paused. Ask them. Ask the one you love. Do you see me? Do you still hold space for me? Do I still feel like home to you? And if the answer is silence, I hope you don't wait for your worth to be discovered by strangers before it's remembered by the one who should have seen it first. In the days that followed, thousands of responses poured in. One man wrote, We sat in the car outside our house after watching this. We didn't say anything for 10 minutes. Then my wife said, I don't feel like I'm allowed to be tired. I cried, and I held her. I'm going to keep holding her, this time with both hands. A woman shared, My daughter asked me today, Mom, why do you smile at your phone and not at Dad? I didn't have an answer. So we watched your video together tonight, and I started talking again. Even public figures reposted it. Artists, teachers, therapists, fathers, newlyweds, divorcees, not because Scarlett gave them advice, but because she gave them language. In her final moments on camera, Scarlett reached for a folded paper beside her. She held it in her lap, then unfolded it carefully. It was a note she'd written to herself months ago. She read it aloud. You are not a shadow. You are not too sensitive. You are not hard to love. You are someone worth staying awake for. Someone worth listening to without distraction. Speak, even if your voice shakes, even if no one claps, speak, because staying silent doesn't protect your heart. It just teaches it how to disappear. She folded it back up. Then she looked into the lens, directly, calmly. I'm not disappearing again. She leaned forward and turned the camera off. The floor was covered in paint, streaked newspaper, not neatly taped down, just scattered across the studio like confetti after a celebration. Alina twirled in the middle of the room, a small brush in one hand, wearing one of Kieran's old dress shirts as a smock. Her laughter bounced off the wails as she dipped into purple paint and declared, This is my masterpiece. Scarlett smiled from across the room, barefoot, her jeans cuffed at the ankles, a streak of green on her cheek. She was working on a canvas beside Kieran, 2 easels side by side, pallets between them. He looked nothing like the version of himself from months ago. The man with the tight schedule and wandering eyes had softened, not into someone perfect, but into someone present. He didn't ask what she was painting. He didn't suggest colors. He simply stood beside her, creating something of his own, a piece that made no sense but made them laugh. Is that supposed to be a tree? Scarlett asked, smirking. He looked at the blob he'd been working on. It was a cat. They both burst out laughing. Alina dropped her brush dramatically. It looks like a potato. Kieran bowed. A potato tree cat, obviously. Scarlett shook her head, wiping her brush and stepping back to look at her own canvas. It wasn't finished, but it didn't need to be. Nothing in this room was perfect. And maybe that's why it finally felt right. The mansion was still large, still modern. But now, there were fingerprints on the windows, a dish left in the sink, toys under the coffee table, a sock on the stairs. The walls had more color now, both from fresh paint and from the sound of life inside them. They didn't host dinner parties. They didn't travel every weekend. But they danced while folding laundry, read bedtime stories on the floor, sat in silence without needing to fix anything. They were still learning, still unlearning, still choosing each other, one day at a time. That evening, after Alina had gone to sleep, brush still in her hand, they sat on the couch with cups of tea. Kieran leaned back, his hand resting near hers. Scarlett looked at the window across from them, the reflection of the studio light soft in the glass. "This feels different," she said. He nodded. "Because we're showing up." She glanced over. "And staying." They didn't need more than that. Later that week, Scarlett recorded one last short video. Just her, in the studio, surrounded by half-finished canvases and a room full of light. This story wasn't about saving a marriage, or proving a point, or being praised for staying. This was about choosing myself first, so I could recognize love again when it stopped asking me to shrink. Healing isn't loud. Growth doesn't post milestones. Love doesn't need to shout to be real. The most powerful thing we can give each other is presence. Undivided, undistracted, unforced. She smiled gently. Maybe the greatest art we create is the life we choose to stay present in. She looked into the lens one last time, steady and full. If this story touched you, don't just watch. Make your own story better. Look at someone today and say, "I see you." She closed the laptop and returned to the canvas. Beside her, Kieran picked up a clean brush and dipped it in yellow. No need for a plan, no need for perfection, just presence. And that was more than enough.